but he just stares. We've had shut-down dogs before, Leo, but this is different. This one is gone. The voice belonged to Marissa Vance, director of the County Line Animal Shelter, and it was pitched with the practiced, weary authority of someone who had seen too much and was paid too little. She stood with her arms crossed, her shelter-branded polo shirt crisp despite the humid chaos of the kennel. Her gaze was fixed on a man standing at the far end of the run, a place reserved for the hard cases, the bite risks, the ones whose time was measured in days, not weeks. The man was old, or at least looked it. His flannel shirt was worn thin at the elbows, his jeans faded to a pale uniform blue. He wasn't looking at the bouncing, barking puppies or the hopeful, tail-wagging mutts. He was looking at the last kennel on the left, the one most staff members avoided. His posture was the only thing that seemed out of place. He stood with a stillness that was utterly alien to the frantic energy of the shelter, a rock in a churning river of desperation. He wasn't slouched like other men his age. His back was straight, his shoulders squared, but without any hint of tension. It was a posture of waiting. Leo, a young man with the ghost of a military haircut still clinging to his scalp, followed her gaze. He'd been working at the shelter for 6 months, a way to decompress after 2 tours in Afghanistan. He understood dogs, especially the broken ones. "Maybe he sees something we don't," Leo offered, his voice low. He'd learned that shouting just added to the cacophony. Marissa sighed, a puff of air that smelled of coffee and frustration. "What he sees is case 734, a 5-year-old male Malinois, surrendered by a state agency that listed him as unfit for service. No name, no history, just a number. He's been here 3 weeks and hasn't moved from that back corner. He won't eat unless you leave the food and walk away. He won't make eye contact. He flinches if you raise your voice anywhere in this building. The vet says he's physically healthy, but mentally, he's a ghost. He's hopeless, Leo. And that old man is wasting his time." The man in the flannel shirt didn't seem to think so. He hadn't moved a muscle in 10 minutes, just stood there, observing. His hands were clasped loosely behind his back, but Leo, from his time in the army, recognized the position. It wasn't casual, it was parade rest, a subconscious habit of a man who had spent a lifetime holding himself in check. The man's face was a roadmap of deep lines, etched by sun and time. But his eyes were clear and alert, scanning, assessing. They weren't the sentimental eyes of someone looking for a sad story to rescue. They were the eyes of a professional, evaluating a problem. Leo saw him shift his weight, a small, economical movement, and begin a slow walk down the concrete aisle, his worn work boots making no sound against the floor. He moved with a quiet purpose that made the frantic barking of the other dogs seem like background noise. He was heading for Marissa's office. Leo felt a strange knot of anticipation tighten in his stomach. This was going to be interesting. The man stepped into Marissa's small, cluttered office, his presence seeming to absorb the sound from the kennels. He didn't look at the photos of successful adoptions on the wall or the stacks of paperwork on her desk. He looked directly at her. "I'd like to see the Malinois," he said. His voice was quiet, gravelly, but it carried a weight that made the air feel thicker. Marissa put on her customer service smile, the one that was both polite and dismissive. "Sir, I appreciate your interest, but that particular dog is not available for public interaction at this time. He's under behavioral assessment." It was the official, non-confrontational way of saying no. The man didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just held her gaze. "I understand," he said, and the simple phrase somehow conveyed that he understood far more than she was telling him. "I'm not the public. I just want to sit with him for a few minutes." "That's not our policy," Marissa said, her tone hardening slightly. "He's a potential liability. He's completely unresponsive, and we don't know his triggers. For your safety and for the dog's well-being, we can't allow it." She was used to winning these arguments. She had regulations and liability waivers on her side. The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to sharpen, to see right through the bureaucratic shield she was holding up. "His well-being is why I'm asking." He took a small step forward, not aggressively, but with a kind of focused intent. His hands, which had been at his sides, now rested on the edge of her desk. Leo, standing in the doorway, saw them clearly for the first time. They were old hands, weathered and scarred. The knuckles were thick, crisscrossed with the faint white lines of old wounds. But what struck Leo was their stillness. There was no tremor, no fidgeting. They were the hands of a surgeon or a watchmaker, imbued with a lifetime of discipline. Marissa was about to deliver her final, non-negotiable refusal when Leo spoke up, surprising himself. "Marissa, let me take him. I'll stay with him the whole time. We can use the quiet room." She shot Leo a look that was a mix of betrayal and disbelief. "Leo, you know the protocol." "I also know that dog hasn't had a single positive interaction since he got here," Leo countered, his voice firm. "What's the harm in letting someone just sit with him from a distance? I'll be right there." He looked at the old man, who gave him a brief, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. There was a shared understanding there that Marissa wasn't privy to, a silent acknowledgement between two men who had seen things. Marissa hesitated, caught between her rigid adherence to the rules and the unexpected alliance between her best kennel tech and this strange, quiet old man. She looked at the man's steady eyes, at Leo's earnest face, and felt a crack appear in her certainty. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion of her job, the endless cycle of lost causes. Maybe it was the unnerving calm of the man in front of her. "Fine," she relented, the word sharp. 10 minutes, in the quiet room. You stay between him and the dog at all times, Leo. If a dog shows any sign of stress, a lip curl, a whale eye, anything, you get him out immediately. Do you understand?" "Crystal," Leo said. The old man said nothing. He simply turned and waited for Leo to lead the way, his patience as vast and silent as a desert at midnight. He already knew how this was going to go. The quiet room was a small cinder block space at the back of the shelter, soundproofed as best they could manage. It smelled of bleach and faint, lingering fear. Leo led the man inside and then went to retrieve case 734. The dog was a magnificent animal, even in his broken state. A classic Belgian Malinois, all lean muscle and sharp angles, with a coat the color of fawn and dust. But his beauty was hollowed out. His head was down, his tail tucked so tightly it was almost invisible. Leo didn't even need a leash. The dog followed him with a shambling, defeated gait, his claws clicking softly on the tile floor. He moved like a prisoner being led to his execution. He didn't resist, didn't fight, didn't do anything. He had simply given up. When they entered the room, the dog immediately went to the farthest corner, curled into a tight ball, and pressed his body against the cool concrete, making himself as small as possible. He didn't look at either of the men. He just stared at the wall. 10 minutes, sir," Leo said softly, positioning himself near the door as Marissa had instructed. The old man nodded. He didn't approach the dog. He didn't make any sudden moves. He walked to the center of the room and slowly, with the careful economy of someone with old injuries, lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the floor. He didn't face the dog directly, but sat at an angle, presenting his side in a non-threatening posture Leo had been taught in animal handling courses. And then he just sat there. Silence descended on the room, a stark contrast to the cacophony outside. 1 minute passed, then 2. The old man didn't speak. He didn't try to coax the dog. He just breathed, in and out, a slow, steady rhythm. Leo watched, fascinated. Every other person who had tried to interact with this dog had used words. "It's okay, buddy. Who's a good boy? Come on, let's be friends." They had filled the space with noise, with their own anxiety and pity. This man filled it with nothing but calm. He was an anchor in the dog's storm of fear. After 5 minutes, Leo saw the first sign. The Malinois' ear, the one closest to the man, twitched. It rotated slightly, like a radar dish trying to lock on to a faint signal. The dog's breathing, which had been shallow and rapid, began to deepen, slowly matching the rhythm of the man's. The old man still didn't move. He just sat, a sentinel of patience. Leo felt like he was witnessing something sacred, a silent conversation happening on a frequency he couldn't hear. The dog's posture began to change, almost imperceptibly. The tight coil of his body loosened by a fraction of an inch. His head lifted just a centimeter from the floor. His gaze shifted from the wall to the man's back. At the 8-minute mark, the old man finally spoke. His voice wasn't a command, not a plea, not a coaxing whisper. It was a simple statement, spoken so softly Leo almost didn't hear it. It was a single word, a name that wasn't a name. Kestrel. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. It wasn't a bark or a growl. It was a full-body tremor. The dog's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been dull and vacant, suddenly blazed with a fierce, intelligent light. He stared at the old man, his entire body rigid with shock and disbelief. Every muscle in his lean frame was corded with tension. It wasn't the tension of fear anymore. It was the tension of recognition. The old man slowly turned his head to look at the dog. Their eyes met for the first time. Leo could feel the energy crackling in the small room. He held his breath. The man spoke again, his voice just as quiet, but with a new layer of something that sounded like profound grief and respect. "Kestrel, stand." It wasn't a command you'd give a pet. It was an order. And the dog responded as if a switch had been flipped deep inside his soul. With a groan of stiff muscles, the animal that hadn't stood voluntarily in 3 weeks pushed himself up. His legs were shaky, but he got to his feet. He stood tall, his head high, his ears pricked forward, his tail coming untucked for the first time, held low but straight. He was no longer Case 734, the hopeless shelter dog. He was a soldier reporting for duty. He took one hesitant step forward, then another, and walked across the room until he was sitting perfectly, precisely, in front of the old man who had given him back his name. He looked at the man, and for the first time, Leo saw the dog's tail give a single, tentative thump against the floor. Marissa appeared in the doorway, her clipboard held against her chest like a shield. She had come to enforce the 10-minute limit. She stopped dead, her mouth falling slightly open. She saw the scene, the old man sitting on the floor, and the hopeless dog sitting at attention in front of him, awake, aware, and utterly focused. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was full of a shared history that she couldn't begin to comprehend. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice stripped of its usual authority. The old man looked up at her, his weathered face unreadable. He reached out a steady hand, not to pet the dog, but to rest it gently on the dog's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie, not ownership. "I reminded him who he is," he said simply. He then looked back at the dog, whose eyes never left his face. "Time to go home, soldier." The paperwork was a formality, a strange bureaucratic epilogue to the miracle Leo had just witnessed. Ben Carter, that was the name on the driver's license, filled out the forms with a steady, methodical hand. He printed, in neat block letters that looked like they belonged on a military document. Under previous experience with dogs, he wrote a single word: extensive. Marissa watched him, her mind struggling to process what she had seen. Her entire framework for evaluating animals, built on years of data, behavioral charts, and standardized tests, had been shattered in 10 minutes by a quiet old man and a single word. She kept replaying the scene in her head. The dog, Kestrel, standing as if called by a king. "Mr. Carter," she began, trying to regain some semblance of control. "The dog has severe trauma. He'll require specialized care. He's not a normal pet. We can provide you with resources, contacts for behavioral specialists who work with..." Ben looked up from the form, his pen momentarily still. He didn't look annoyed or offended. He looked understanding. "Thank you, ma'am, but I don't think we'll be needing them." His gaze flickered towards the quiet room, where Kestrel was now waiting patiently with Leo. He doesn't need a specialist. He needs a routine he recognizes. He needs a job, even if that job is just watching my back while I'm in the garden. He needs to know his tour is over. The phrase, "his tour is over," hung in the air. It was a phrase from a world Marissa knew nothing about. It spoke of deployments, of duty, of things far beyond the scope of a county animal shelter. She looked at Ben Carter again, really looked at him this time. The faded flannel shirt, the worn jeans, they were a kind of camouflage. Beneath them was a frame that, though aged, was held with an unyielding discipline. His economy of motion, his constant quiet assessment of his surroundings, the way he stood as if rooted to the very core of the earth. He was hiding in plain sight. "Who are you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, more a thought spoken aloud than an actual inquiry. Ben Carter gave a small, sad smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just a man who owes a debt to a good dog," he said, and returned to the paperwork. He finished the last line, pushed the clipboard back across the desk, and pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket. He paid the $100 adoption fee in cash with 5 crisp $20 bills. No credit cards, no digital trail. Leo brought Kestrel out on a slip lead. The dog walked beside him, no longer shambling, but moving with a controlled, fluid grace. His eyes were constantly moving, scanning the lobby, the exits, the people, but he kept returning his focus to Ben. He was on duty. Ben took the leash from Leo, his hand covering the younger man's for a moment. "Thank you," he said. And in those 2 words, Leo heard a depth of gratitude that was startling. It was the thanks of one soldier to another for having his back. "Take care of him, sir," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. "He'll be taking care of me," Ben corrected gently. He gave the leash a soft tug, and Kestrel fell into a perfect heel position on his left side. Together, the old man and the dog walked out of the shelter doors and into the afternoon sun. They didn't look back. They moved as one unit, 2 parts of a whole that had finally been reunited. The chaos of the shelter seemed to fade away behind them, irrelevant to the quiet world they now inhabited together. Marissa stood at the window, watching them go until the man's old pickup truck disappeared down the road. She felt a profound sense of humility, an emotion she wasn't accustomed to. She had been so certain, so sure of her expertise. She had looked at a hero and labeled him hopeless. She turned to Leo, who was still standing by the door. "What do you think that was all about?" she asked, her voice quiet. Leo stared at the empty road. He thought of the way Ben Carter stood, the way he spoke, the way he handled the dog, not with affection, but with a deep, ingrained professional respect. He thought of the name Kestrel, a type of falcon, a hunter, a weapon guided by a master. "I think," Leo said slowly, "We just witnessed a reunion." He walked back towards the kennels, leaving Marissa alone with her thoughts and the sudden, overwhelming realization that there were sacrifices and bonds in the world that her charts and protocols could never hope to measure. She picked up the dog's intake form. In the space for a name, she crossed out Case 734 and, in her own neat handwriting, wrote Kestrel. It was the least she could do. Ben's house was small and sparse, set back from a country road on a few acres of wooded land. Inside, it was immaculately clean. There were no knickknacks, no clutter. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the kitchen. A single, well-worn armchair faced a small television in the living room. On the mantelpiece, above a cold fireplace, there was only one object: a framed photograph, faded by time, of a group of young men in desert camouflage. They were heavily armed, their faces grim and smudged with dirt, but they stood together with an easy camaraderie. In the center of the group, a younger, harder version of Ben Carter had his hand on the head of a sleek, dark Malinois puppy. Kestrel entered the house cautiously, his nose twitching, taking in the new smells. He did a slow, methodical sweep of the main floor, clearing each room, his training so deeply ingrained that it was instinct. Ben didn't stop him. He let the dog work, letting him satisfy the part of his brain that needed to know the layout, the exits, the potential threats. When Kestrel had finished his patrol, he returned to the living room and sat down, looking at Ben, awaiting his next command. Ben didn't give one. He simply went to the kitchen, filled a heavy ceramic bowl with fresh, cool water, and placed it on the floor. He did the same with a bowl of high-quality dog food. He didn't point to it or tell Kestrel to eat. He just provided the resources and stepped back, giving the dog space. For a long time, Kestrel didn't move. He just watched Ben. He was waiting for the catch, for the other shoe to drop. In his world, nothing was ever given freely. Ben went and sat in his armchair. He didn't turn on the television. He just sat, watching the dog, his presence a calm, unwavering constant. After 20 minutes, Kestrel finally broke his vigil. He walked slowly to the water bowl and drank, his thirst deep and long. Then he moved to the food and ate, quickly and efficiently, without gulping. When he was done, he looked at Ben, then walked over and lay down on the floor beside the armchair, his body not quite touching Ben's leg, but close enough to feel the warmth. He sighed, a deep, shuddering sound that seemed to release years of tension, and closed his eyes. That night, a storm rolled in. Thunder rattled the windows, and lightning bleached the dark woods in brief, stark flashes. With the first crack of thunder, Kestrel was on his feet, body trembling, a low whine escaping his throat. The sound was too much like the crump of mortars, the percussive blast of an IED. Ben didn't say, "It's okay." He didn't try to pet or soothe the dog. He knew that would only heighten the anxiety. Instead, he got up, walked to the mantel, and took down the framed photograph. He sat on the floor next to the trembling dog. "You remember this day, Kestrel?" he said, his voice a low murmur beneath the storm's fury. "That was right after the qualification course. You were just a pup. You bit Sergeant McMillan on the arm because he tried to take your toy." He traced the face of one of the men in the photo. "That's Jacobs. He always saved you the jerky from his MREs. And there's Ortiz. He taught you to find a specific scent in a pile of burning tires." He wasn't just telling stories, he was rebuilding a world. He was reminding Kestrel of a time before the trauma, of the team, of the pack. He spoke for over an hour, his voice a steady, calm counterpoint to the raging storm. He spoke of dusty FOBs and the smell of helicopter exhaust. He spoke of long, silent nights on Overwatch, the dog a warm, living presence beside him, their breathing synchronized. He spoke of the bond forged in shared danger, a bond deeper than love, a bond of absolute trust. Slowly, painstakingly, Kestrel's trembling began to subside. He crept closer to Ben, resting his head on the man's knee. The thunder still made him flinch, but the panic was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. He was with his handler. He was safe. Ben rested a hand on the dog's head, feeling the strong bones of his skull. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small, quiet house, two old warriors, both scarred by the same war, had finally found a place of peace. They were home. Back at the shelter, Marissa couldn't sleep. The image of the dog standing at attention was burned into her mind. Her certainty had been her armor, and now it was gone, leaving her feeling exposed and foolish. She had built her career on being the smartest person in the room, on data and evidence-based practices. But Ben Carter hadn't used data. He had used a name. The next morning, driven by a need to understand, she went into her office and pulled up Kestrel's file. The surrendering agency was listed as a generic State Department Canine Services, a vague and unhelpful title. There was a contact number, though. She had called it when he was first brought in, and a bored-sounding bureaucrat had simply read from a script, stating the dog was no longer suitable for its designated role. This time, she wouldn't be so easily dismissed. She dialed the number again. The same bored voice answered. "I'm calling about a Malinois, asset number 734, that you surrendered to my shelter last month," Marissa said, her voice firm. "Ma'am, as I told you before, we cannot provide any further information on retired assets." "I'm not asking for information," Marissa pressed. "I'm telling you that this dog is a highly trained operator, not a surplus animal. He responds to the name Kestrel. He is suffering from what is clearly severe combat-related PTSD, and you people dumped him in a county kill shelter to die." The anger in her voice surprised her. It was righteous and hot. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The bureaucratic boredom was gone, replaced by a cold, professional caution. "Where did you get that name?" "The dog's handler came and adopted him yesterday," Marissa said, deciding to use the term Leo had suggested. It felt right. Another, longer pause. "Describe the handler," the voice said, now sharp and alert. Marissa described Ben Carter in detail. His age, his quiet demeanor, his steady hands, his ramrod posture. The way he moved, the way he spoke. The man on the phone let out a slow breath. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to put you on a brief hold." The line went quiet. Marissa waited, her heart pounding. She was deep in territory she didn't understand, a world of assets and handlers and secrets. After 5 minutes, a new voice came on the line. It was different, deeper, calmer, and radiating an authority that was absolute. "This is Director Evans. To whom am I speaking?" Marissa gave her name and title. "I need to understand what happened to that dog," she said. "I need to know that his handler is who he says he is." "First," the director said, his voice like stones grinding together, "you need to forget the name Kestrel. You will not repeat it. You will not write it down again. You will not speak it to anyone. Is that understood?" "Yes," Marissa whispered. "Second, the dog you had was a Special Operations Combat dog. He was attached to a Naval Special Warfare Unit for 6 years. He participated in over 200 direct action missions. He is credited with 24 confirmed finds of explosive devices, saving the lives of at least 50 American servicemen. During his final deployment, his unit was ambushed. The dog sustained shrapnel wounds, but continued to engage the enemy, defending his wounded handler until reinforcements arrived. That handler was Master Chief Petty Officer Ben Carter. Marissa felt the air leave her lungs. Master Chief, Navy SEAL. Master Chief Carter was medically retired due to injuries sustained in that same engagement. The director continued, his voice softening slightly. The dog was retired for psychological trauma. They were separated by medical and administrative channels. A mistake. A bureaucratic failure that should never have happened. We've been trying to locate the dog for 6 months. The paperwork was lost. He said the word lost with a disgust that made it clear he meant deliberately misplaced by someone who didn't care. So he is his handler? Marissa asked, needing to hear it one more time. Ma'am, Director Evans said, and now his voice was filled with a profound respect. Ben Carter is not his handler. He is the handler. There is no one on this earth better equipped to care for that dog. He isn't just giving that dog a home. He's giving him back his life. You didn't just facilitate an adoption yesterday. You corrected a grave injustice. On behalf of a grateful nation, we thank you for that. Now, please, for their safety and their peace, let them be. The line went dead. Marissa sat in her chair, the phone still pressed to her ear. The small, mundane world of her shelter suddenly felt connected to a much larger story of heroism, sacrifice, and a bond that bureaucracy had tried and failed to break. She had stood in the presence of 2 legends and had seen only a broken dog and a lonely old man. Over the next few weeks, the story of the old man and the hopeless dog became a quiet legend around the shelter. Leo told the new volunteers about it, a cautionary tale against judging by appearances. For Marissa, it was more than a story. It was a fundamental shift in her perspective. She started spending more time with the difficult dogs, the fearful ones, looking for the flicker of who they used to be, the hero hiding inside the terrified animal. She was a better director for it, more compassionate, more patient. One Saturday, she found herself with an unexpected free afternoon. On a whim, she looked up Ben Carter's address from the adoption form. She bought a bag of the highest quality grain-free dog food she could find and a durable chew toy designed for powerful jaws. She told herself it was a standard post-adoption follow-up, but she knew it was more than that. It was an apology, an act of penance. She found the small house easily. As she pulled into the gravel driveway, she saw them in the side yard. Ben was on his knees in a small vegetable garden, carefully tending to his tomato plants. A few feet away, Kestrel was lying in the grass, watching the perimeter. He wasn't tense or hypervigilant. He was relaxed but alert, a professional at ease. His coat shone in the sun, and he had filled out, his muscles lean and powerful. He looked like a different dog. He looked whole. Kestrel's head came up as her car door closed, and he let out a single, low woof. It wasn't aggressive. It was an announcement. Contact. Front. Ben looked up, shielding his eyes with a dirt-smudged hand. He saw her and slowly got to his feet, brushing the soil from his knees. "Nam?" he said with a nod as she approached. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to intrude," Marissa began, feeling awkward and out of place. "I was in the area, standard follow-up, and I brought these." She held out the bag of food and the toy. Ben looked at the offerings, then at her. He saw the apology in her eyes. He gave that same small, sad smile. "That's very kind of you, but he's on a specific diet, and his favorite toy is an old rope knot I made for him." He gestured with his head, and Marissa saw a frayed piece of thick rope lying in the grass near the dog. Marissa's face fell. Of course. She was still trying to solve a problem with things, with money, when the solution had always been something else entirely. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice small. I know who you are, and I know who he is. I made a phone call." Ben's face hardened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of the operator beneath the old gardener. Then it softened. He just nodded, accepting it. "He's a good dog," was all he said. "He's a hero," Marissa corrected, her voice thick with emotion. "You both are. And I called him hopeless. I was going to have him put down." The confession hung in the air, shameful and heavy. Ben looked at Kestrel, who was now sitting up, watching their exchange with his intelligent amber eyes. Then he looked back at Marissa. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a deep, weary wisdom. "You saw what was on the surface, ma'am," he said, his voice gentle. "You saw a broken tool. You couldn't see the spirit inside. That's not your fault. Most people can't." He took a step closer. He wasn't hopeless. He was just waiting for someone who spoke his language, waiting for permission to stand down. The simplicity and grace of his forgiveness were more profound than any rebuke could have been. Marissa felt tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for what you did. For what you both did." Ben Carter simply nodded again. He looked down at his partner, his friend. "Easy, Kestrel," he murmured. The dog laid his head back down in the grass, content. The two warriors, man and dog, stood together in the quiet afternoon sun, their war finally over, their peace finally won. Marissa got back in her car, leaving the bag of food and the toy on the passenger seat, a reminder of a lesson she would never forget. She had learned that the deepest wounds and the greatest heroism are often silent, and that sometimes the most hopeless cases are just waiting for one right word to be called back to life.